Hey everyone, it's Yoli Chisholm, and this is the Yoli Chisholm Show where I talk about everything marketing, past and present, tools, tactics, and technology that I'm excited about. And in today's show, I am going to do a very basic 101 on advertising costs. What you need to be thinking about, especially for you small and medium-sized businesses, as you think about spending your ad dollars more efficiently, or even asking yourself if you need to be advertising. I'm going to give you just the basics of what you need to know about advertising across traditional and digital mediums. Let's get into it. All right, guys, welcome back. As we get back into advertising costs and learning what the differences are across all mediums, I thought I would start by making sure that you guys understand that advertising is just one very small slice of everything that a marketer has to take into consideration as they think about marketing their business. Advertising falls into the second P. For those of you who have been to B school and they talk about the P's of marketing, they have expanded as technology and as the marketing profession has evolved over the years. And so some people might talk about the eight P's, some might talk about the 6 P's, some might talk about the original 4 P's of marketing. The P that advertising falls under is promotion. And even within promotion, advertising is a very small component of that P. So advertising, as we are defining it, is any paid form of non-personal presentation and promotion of ideas, goods, or services by an identified sponsor. You'll typically see across different mediums that the platforms will identify that this is a sponsored ad or this content has been paid for. It is an advertorial or it is a paid ad spot. And they're usually distinguished. If you're on a platform that has native content, there is some marker that identifies that this is sponsored content. Okay, so let's get into it. All right, so before you begin advertising or even think about it, you got to think about what your objectives are. What are you trying to do at this stage in your business? What are you trying to do as you think about promotion? You know, similar to a content strategy, there is this concept of top of funnel, middle of funnel, and bottom of funnel when it comes to advertising as well. So at the top of the funnel, you are wanting to drive awareness. You know, if you think about the first phase in the buyer's journey, they might not even be aware of your brand and or may not be aware of the problem. This is the phase where you want to make them aware of your brand and aware of the problem and aware that you have a solution to the problem. This is the first phase of advertising. So if you are just at the beginning launching a product, you really want to think about what component, what percentage of your advertising is just about driving awareness of your brand, the problem in the category, and the fact that you are a solution. Middle of funnel is once they're aware of the problem and that you are a potential solution, your advertising is designed to get your brand on the short list for consideration. The consideration and evaluation phase in the buyer's journey, there are specific ad types, ad tactics, ad platforms that can help you drive consideration. And so when you think about your ad strategy, you want to think, how much of my plan is just about driving consideration? And the actions the results, the objectives is really to turn somebody from an anonymous visitor to a known visitor. That means getting some form of their contact details. So whether it's a digital ad campaign, then you want to drive a lead. If you're in the B2b space, you want to drive some sort of email contact if you're just trying to get them into your community, into your database. At this stage, you're just trying to turn them from an unknown to a known entity that you can then nurture and remarket to. So at the bottom of the funnel, you're really looking to drive conversion. If you are a B2C business where you're selling to consumers, this really is driving the sale. You're looking for your advertising to convert a user to a buyer. If you're in a B2B business, it could be any of those tactics that drive them from becoming a known entity in your database that you can then have a salesperson reach out to and have a sales call with. So let's talk about advertising costs. And for our purposes and for this exercise, which is really a very basic level, we're going to use CPM, which is cost per thousand. How much does it cost to get in front of 1,000 users across each of the mediums, traditional versus digital? So at the very top, you see that the most expensive advertising tends to be TV, at a $10 CPM. Now, typically even prime time can be double, triple that, depending on the time of day and the actual show. The CPMs can get quite high when it comes to television. And then you can see the more mature the medium, the higher the cost per thousand tends to be. It does not necessarily mean the more effective that channel is. What we have found is that the digital channels tend to have more robust targeting and actually can be more effective than the more mature mediums. But just in general, you should understand that even in digital, the more mature a platform has been around, the higher the CPMs tend to be. That's why savvy marketers want to always be keeping an eye on the newer channels. Before we get deeper into the advertising costs on an individual basis, I want you to get comfortable with a couple of terms. So when we think about paid versus organic, the definition of organic tends to be any content that has been published on any medium, so content or that is in search results that was not paid for. So when you as a brand do a post on Facebook or Twitter, for example, that is considered organic. There has been no paid advertising behind it. And then as soon as you decide to boost the post or promote the post, that is when we define it as a paid ad. For example, in the old G channel, like search, the paid ads tend to be those placements that show up at the top of a search result, at the side or at the bottom of a search result, and the content in the middle that shows up organically are what we typically refer to as organic search results. Those are what we refer to when we're talking about SEO. So that's the difference between paid and organic. Paid is content that was paid for, sponsored. Organic is content that was just published with no ad spend behind it. Other two terms I want you to get used to is the difference between reach and impressions. Reach usually refers to the number of users that are exposed to your content or ad, and impressions usually refers to the number of times that an ad is shown to said users. So for example, let's say 5 people see your ad, that means your reach was 5. But if they see your ad twice, each of them, then your impressions were 10. All right, so I kind of alluded to this point earlier when I talked about how the CPMs get higher the more mature a platform is. The other thing you need to keep in mind is that organic reach, that is content that was not paid for, this is just the content you publish, organic reach tends to decrease the more mature a platform gets. And even within a network that might have different ad types, the newer ad types tend to have greater reach than the more mature ad types. So for example, let's just talk about organic reach, for example. On a platform like Facebook, for example, in 2011, as a brand, if you had a certain number of followers, when you posted that content organically, you could typically count on having that organic post be seen by about 25% of your followers. Today, typically, maybe only 2% of your followers will see that organic post. Hence, why you have the need to advertise. Okay, let's talk about where marketers like you and I are advertising today. Typically, on the B2C side of things, you see that there's been most marketers tend to have Facebook part of their marketing mix. If we're looking at social media platforms, so right now Facebook is experiencing, it's still growing, but that's primarily one of the channels that's always part of the marketing mix. Twitter is in there. We see Instagram has seen significant growth over the last few years. And then you see other channels like Pinterest and Snapchat growing steadily. When you look at B2B marketing, you'll see that because LinkedIn is a very different social media network, they tend to get most of the B2B marketers have that part of their organic strategy. And then we have about 76% of them that are actually advertising on LinkedIn. And then you can see the rest of the channel mix. So organically, B2B marketers tend to have some sort of activation, doing steady publishing on channels like LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. But then the advertising mix is quite different in terms of how many of them have actually pulled the trigger to actually do ad spend on each of these channels. All right, so let's talk about television. Just wanted to give you a sense of the sort of different dimensions you can be thinking about as you think about buying television. So the cost to buy a 30-second spot, for example, in prime time at a show that is quite hot, and it also differs by network, but it can cost you about 300,000, anywhere from 300,000 and down to maybe about $10,000. But you can see it is quite costly, and if you look at it on a CPM basis, on broadcast TV, traditional broadcast TV, in 2019, 2020, you're looking at about a $36 per thousand. So $36 to get in front of 1,000 people. On cable, it's about $19 to get in front of 1,000 people. You look at it by city. So there are various dimensions. I showed you prime time, and then I showed you broadcast versus cable, and then you can see that the CPMs can also change depending on the geo. So what city you're trying to target primarily. And so if you're trying to target in Los Angeles, adults between 25 and 54, you're looking at about a $34 CPM versus Cleveland, that might be at $21. So you need to be thinking about all of these elements. And then some of the benefits of television, obviously you can get wide geographic coverage, you can reach a very broad audience. So if you think about those advertising objectives I mentioned in the beginning, if you're just trying to make people aware of the problem and you as a solution, this is why you see a lot of pharmaceutical companies, for example, or finance organizations do television, because they're really trying to get a broad audience. They're really doing more broad awareness marketing. There tends to be, from a marketer standpoint, because of the maturity of the platform, there's this perceived idea of some accountability around measurability of the medium itself. And there's sort of an established model of buying TV ads. And for mass consumer products, there is this perceived idea of a proven success record of working in terms of driving awareness. The disadvantages are, that audience share is declining in terms of the number of people, snipping their cable, and that audience share is declining, although it's still quite big. I think it's highly exaggerated, in my personal opinion. I think you just need to be more strategic about how you think about your advertising. And so the impact of DVR with people fast forwarding through commercials obviously has impacted the effectiveness of TV ads. And the TV ads are not television itself. When you think about, if you're a product that's trying to get in front of millennials or trying to get in front of a younger demographic, there are fewer of them watching television, and so you're at a disadvantage if you're thinking about that medium for targeting it broadly. You want to think about some other channels where the young people actually are. And then not only do you have the advertising costs, but you've got the high production costs. So the cost of actually producing an ad, you could put those dollars to your digital ad spend. And so when you think about comparing a traditional medium versus a digital medium, you also have to take into consideration the cost of producing that traditional ad piece. Could you spend it more effectively elsewhere? And then, the prime time is no longer prime time. Prime time used to be a real time in the day where you really had a captive audience. But now, because people are able to, they're able to record shows, they're able to, binge watch, shows in a whole time slot. This idea of prime time really and truly is being disrupted. And so why pay those high CPMs for those prime time spots? It's up to you. Depends on your strategy. And then, you have to think about ad clutter. You have to think about, how do you cut through the noise? How do you cut through the noise when people really are annoyed by one ad after the other? Is there another medium where your ad can be consumed in a much less cluttered way? Okay. Cable television benefits. It's high penetration in about 90% of U.S. households. The CPMs tend to be lower than broadcast, as I showed you, and you are able to to target a little bit more smartly than you can with television, with broadcast television. And then the programming is available in more broader time slots versus broadcast television. And then there's just more content, so you can start to get smarter about the kind of audience that you want to get in front of, particularly as channels have become sort of niche. So you can think about a channel like HGTV, where if you are in consumer packaged goods space or your appliance space, you're trying to get in front of maybe you sell a blender, it's you can justify doing some television advertising in HGTV and get in front of professional cooks or amateur wannabe cooks or people who love cooking, etc. All right. So let's just talk about radio really quickly. I find radio quite interesting because I think as more of us have to commute, I still think there is a segment of people who are continuing to listen to radio. And obviously, as people are commuting but not in their cars, that's when you want to also be considering podcasts, which I will be talking about a little bit later. But radio, if you want to just look at radio versus TV versus newspaper, you can see that it's at a $10 for a 30-second ad. But again, radio has the same sort of constraints in terms of you have to be thinking about buying on multiple radio stations in order to get the reach, a combined reach of an audience. You also have to be thinking about the time of day you are going to buy, and obviously the time when people are in their cars tends to have a higher CPM. I didn't talk about the benefits. So, you have some targeting capabilities in terms of geo and the demographic audience of a particular show. It's fairly inexpensive compared to some of the other traditional broadcast mediums, and you can run your ad multiple times over the course of a time block. And they do make the point that there's no seasonal listener erosion. I would beg to differ on that, but I think there are times where you've got more consumers on the road, more commuters on the road versus others. I wouldn't be buying radio ads during holidays, so I'm not quite sure what they're referring to there. But okay, but there's no visual component, and you have to buy on multiple stations if you're trying to get a broad reach, so that's not very convenient. So let's talk about out of home. Out of home, I think, is really interesting in that it's the one traditional medium that actually is projected to experience growth in the next few years. And that is primarily because when people tend to buy television, radio, they tend to buy it and also include out of home, because the two sort of, at the least the way out of home associations and industry advocates position it, is that it tends to compensate for the shortcomings of the other traditional mediums. And so with out of home, you can get that frequency as that commuter passes by that billboard and then has the radio sort of reinforcing that messaging, and then the television when they get home. And so that's how traditional marketers have tended to think about out of home, as out of home sort of reinforcing what the consumer is seeing on television and hearing on the radio. And that has actually not changed as digital has become more adopted. You'll still see the brands whose objective is awareness still continue to do out of home. And so you see that in the US, the CPMs for out of home are way below television and way below radio, round about $4 to $5 cost to get in front of 1,000 users. All right, so let's go digital. We're just going to go to cost per click for a minute. So when you talk about Google, you talk about buying ads on search, on the search engines and search results, but they also have an ad network where you can run banner ads via the publishers who are part of their AdSense program, who are part of their advertising program, where you can run ads on blogs and other sites that are part of the Google network. So when you're buying ads on Google AdWords, you have the component of search text ads in search results and also banner ads in their Google network. So you can see that the average cost per click, the cost to get somebody to click over to your landing page, whether it's your website or whether it's an event landing page or whether it's a landing page to get them to download some content, on average you're looking at a $2.60 cost per click. Okay, so the other thing you need to keep in mind when it comes to digital channels is that the channels, because of AI and how it's been integrated into each of these platforms, that the ad networks actually get smarter. And so your cost can actually go down as the platform itself starts to learn how to get in front of the types of users that really have high intent for your product and are more likely to click. And so as you think about your ad strategy, you want to think about, okay, my starting CPC or my starting CPM is X. And as we get smarter, as the platform gets smarter, and as you make adjustments on your landing page to the creative, etc., you have the ability to actually lower your cost per click and your cost per CPM, which you do not have that ability in traditional channels. So that's one of the first advantages, is because AI is built into these digital channels, they get smarter, and your starting costs may not be your cost at the end of a campaign. That is why you want your marketing, your digital marketing strategy, to have a component that is always on. This stop starting kills your marketing. And quite often when people judge digital channels and say it didn't work, one of the elements of why they think it didn't work is because they do not understand this about digital channels. There are multiple reasons why channels might not work for a particular marketer. It's got to do with a lot of whether they have the chops on the creative side and whether they have the experience to really understand the technical side. So Google, average cost per click, $2.60. And that differs, as you can see here, by industry and who you're trying to target. So the other thing about digital channels is the cost per click for a pharmaceutical, actually maybe pharmaceutical wasn't a great example, for a consumer packaged goods product that's trying to target, a mom in Ohio, the cost per click will be very different than, say, an automaker's who's trying to target a potential car buyer in New York City. Okay, and so the targeting can get quite granular. How long you keep your campaign in market has an impact on your costs, and who you're trying to target and where also can impact your costs. So let's talk a little bit about social media advertising and the difference in costs by platform. As you can see over on the right hand side, you can see the cost per click is quite different on each social media channel. Now, remember what I said about the maturity of the channel, and that also extends to the maturity of the ad types and ad placements on each channel. So you'll find that the newer placements tend to be cheaper, and then as they mature, they get more expensive. The newer networks tend to be cheaper, and then as they mature, they get more expensive. And then when you see LinkedIn's, you'll see on the B2B side, the higher value it is in terms of getting in front of a particular very targeted audience. You want to get in front of CEOs at tech companies, or CEOs at oil companies, or a financial admin at finance companies in New York City. You will have to pay a higher cost to get in front of a more targeted audience. And so that gives you a sense of the differences across networks. The savvier marketer wants to find the balance of a channel that has not necessarily reached its peak performance, but has robust targeting. So, take a look at Pinterest in the context of this information right now. Are some of you guys missing out by not having a Pinterest strategy? It has not reached its peak performance, and the cost to drive a click or get in front of 1,000 people is quite low. Or to have 1,000 impressions, have your ad show up 1,000 times is quite low. All right, let's dig into each social network. So you'll see on each social network, there are various ways that are tied to your ad objectives that you can pay for advertising. So cost per click, 97 cents. Cost per 1,000 impressions to show your ad 1,000 times, $7. A cost per like to get somebody to follow your page is about $1.07. And cost per action to get somebody to actually convert. So drive them to your website. You've got the Facebook pixel on the website. They actually fill out a form and they become a known user to you. You're going to pay about $5 for that. Okay? You might be in the consumer space. You drive them to your website, get them to give you their email address, join your newsletter. You're going to pay about $5. Now, remember, this is guidance, because for somebody that's targeting moms, it might be lower. For somebody that's targeting, specifically male gamers, it might be a different cost. But this gives you what the average cost in general is. Now, the main advantage of social media advertising, in my opinion, is the flexibility on minimums. Let me just go back here for a second. So if you look at the left-hand side of this slide, whereas in out-of-home magazines, TV, radio, newspapers, you have to spend a minimum amount of dollars, and it's typically in the thousands. This is why social media advertising becomes such an advantage, because you can spend as low as $1 a day. If you decide you just want to run you want to spend $5 on Facebook for the next 5 days, you could do that. And so over on the left-hand side, you can see the minimums by network for advertising each day. This is why we are being inundated by advertising. But since I'm a member of that community, I am supportive of smart advertising. Okay, let's look at Instagram. Instagram, you can buy in terms of depending on your objectives, you can buy on a CPC or a CPM basis. Cost per click is averaging about $3.56 and $7.91 cost per 1,000 impressions. The minimum ad spend, minimum budget for Instagram is $1 per day of impressions, $1 per day for clicks or likes or views, and about $40 per day for conversions. Okay, in terms of how much budget you've got to spend. I mean, how much minimum, right? So this is not the thousands that radio or TV asks for. You can spend very little. On YouTube, cost per clicks, average $3.21. Cost per thousand, just about $2 more than on Facebook and Instagram, $9. But again, differs on who you're trying to target. Cost per view. Look at this. This is an example of even the tactic might differ. So if the tactic is not as mature, the cost will be low. You can get a 10 cents to 30 cents cost per view. Okay? For those of you that are spending hundreds of thousands on TV, why? When you can get a 10 cents cost per view. Baffles. On LinkedIn, there are 3 different ways you can buy advertising. You can pay for it on a cost per click basis, and it's about a $5 cost per click. On a per CPM to get 1,000 impressions, it'll cost you about $6.59 to get your ad seen 1,000 times. And it is it's 80 cents cost per send. You want to get that email into their inbox, it'll cost you 80 cents per send, and it'll cost you $1.70 per open. So you can decide how you want to spend your dollars. Twitter, 38 cents cost per click, $6.46 cost per 1,000 impressions, cost per engagement, right? Retweet, share, like. It is $1.35 per engagement. A $2 to $40 cost per follower. So if you think about that cost per like versus that cost per follower, you can decide how much you want to spend growing your Facebook versus Twitter versus Instagram following. It all depends on what your ad objective is. And then cost per download will be about $1.95 to $3.25. Pinterest, $1.50 cost per click, $30 per 1,000 impressions. Okay? All right. So I just wanted to give you guys a sense of what podcasts could cost you. Now, podcasts, you think about, there's about 150 million Americans who commute to work every day. And what are they listening to? If they're not in their car, they could potentially, they listen to the podcasts in their car as well. If they're not listening to radio and they're not listening to music, they could be listening to a podcast. And if they're on the train or the subway, they could be listening to a podcast and hear your ad. On podcasts, there's 2 types of ad. There's the recorded ad, which tends to be less effective than the organic ad that is spoken by the host. And so that is why you hear those hosts kind of talking about a product or service themselves. Those actually tend to do far better because they tend to be perceived as an endorsement by the podcaster. And if the podcaster is reputable, then there you are. You have got that social proof. And so you can see they sell them per size, sort of per episode, on a CPM basis, but you can see that the costs differ depending on the size of the audience. I should say that. Okay, so you can take a look at those. You can get a $20 cost per CPM for a fairly, a podcast that has just about 1,000 listeners. And you can see a podcast that has over 1 million listeners will cost you about $28 to get in front of 1,000 of those listeners. Okay, that's for a 30-second ad, and then for a 60-second ad, the costs are slightly more, tend to be $2 more. All right, so let's look at it across the board. So I am not a proponent of trying to promote digital versus traditional. I really just think you have to be working with a marketing professional who knows what they're doing and can give you some guidance based on your budget to show you how you can get the most out of your budget given your advertising objectives. Are you trying to drive awareness? Are you trying to drive consideration? Are you trying to drive conversion and close a sale? And how much are you willing to spend to have that mix? Now, what I am a proponent of is omni-channel marketing, integrated marketing, if your budget allows, having as many channels that logically make sense in your marketing mix, because consumers are in multiple places and the buyer's journey is no longer linear, and you have to reach them everywhere they are, reinforcing that message. Studies show that it takes 12 ads, 12 touches, 12 times for them to see your brand, for them to actually take an action. And so if all you're doing is one channel's ads, then you're going to need to be a lot more strategic within that channel. But I do think you're leaving money on the table by not surrounding that user everywhere they go. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I hope that that has been helpful in giving you a sense. Let's just look at this slide. So this basically comes from the folks PJ Solomon. They looked at, based on public data, on what brands were spending across multiple mediums to see, what the average cost was. And so you can see, broadcast television and primetime is the most expensive. Actually, newspapers tend to range anywhere from $31 to $39 cost per thousand. And in their cases, I really think they're just compensating for the decline in readership. It is not an indication of value, in my opinion. And so I think you need to be very strategic and smart about why you're buying an ad in a newspaper. Similarly, broadcast television, I think there's still a case for buying television depending on your business and what your ad objective is. Super Bowl ads are still very cheap, but again, price of entry, right? That medium, the price, it's not like you can do a minimum buy, but if you look at the cost per thousand, a Super Bowl ad actually is quite cheap. So there you have it, a 101 on advertising costs. And literally, probably as I finish this podcast, things have shifted. So you need to keep yourself in the game to understand what your costs are going to be, because the technology is advancing faster than you can say CPM. Have a great week. What you waiting for? I see you standing.